Ladies and gentlemen, we are live here on Flock Friday for another edition of Flock Friday, where we are live on this show every single Friday afternoon to preview the Baltimore Ravens' upcoming game. They're coming off of the bye week, and today they have a huge clash on the way against the Chicago Bears. To break it all down today, I'm joined by Jacob Infante, who does a lot of work across the NFL covering the Chicago Bears and more. Jacob, thank you for taking the time here today.
Yeah, no, of course, Jace. I mean, I appreciate you having me. It's good to, good to get back together here for this.
Of course. No, I'm really, really excited to have you part of the show here today to talk some football. And I see we already have some great viewership on here. So if you guys do want to call in, I did put the link in there. I'm going to be putting it on Twitter very, very soon. You guys can always, comment live. And we're really going to try to get as many comments and as many people involved here as possible. I mean, Jacob, we're talking about a big matchup. Pretty crazy, right? The Ravens are 1-5, but it still seems like a pretty high-profile matchup overall. Before we break down maybe some of the nitty-gritty specifics, what overall stands out to you as the Bears prepare for their Week 8 clash?
Yeah, I mean, so I think the Bears, going through a, 4-game winning streak here, there's a lot of momentum. Things haven't been perfect through that, obviously, and there's the sense that, this team still has a lot more work to do. But the fact that they're winning games while there some of these growing pains is still really encouraging for what I think could happen in the long run, not just for the rest of this season, but for coming seasons. I mean, obviously, this is a very important game for both teams. You'd know more on the the Ravens side than I would, but for the Bears specifically, sure. I think that you're looking at it as they play in a very difficult NFC North, and the way that I look at it is every single game outside of the division really counts. And the more games you win outside of the division, the more leeway you have for a potential playoff appearance down the stretch. Because you have, you're sitting at 4-2. If you sit at 5-2 after potentially beating the Ravens, then you have, Yeah, then it becomes a little bit easier. You can't. I mean, obviously, you want to win those games against. You've got the Lions, the Packers, and the Vikings still coming up. But you could maybe only have to win 2 of those divisional games, and you could still make the playoffs realistically, because they still have a couple other games later down the stretch that I think are definitely winnable. So I think that this is a very important one for sure. For both teams, obviously, but for the Bears in particular, I think that now you're at 4-2. You're thinking about the playoffs, and that should be the goal in any capacity, whether it's winning the division or even as a wild card team. So games like this are going to be incredibly important. So they have a little bit more. They have a little bit more room to work with once those divisional games start kicking off.
For sure. And I think that when you do play in a division like the NFC North, you want to give yourself as much flexibility as possible, because division games are always tough, particularly this year where maybe the Vikings seem a little bit weaker, but again, still a division rival, and the Packers and Lions really do seem like juggernauts and, 2 of the most premier contenders across the entire NFL. So it will certainly be an interesting race. I think obviously 5-2 is a whole lot different than 4-3. For Baltimore, 1-6 is a whole lot different than 2-5. And if you're 1-6, it doesn't even really matter the schedule. At that point, you have 0 margin for error, if there is any margin for error still left for Baltimore, and you could pretty much kiss your playoff chances goodbye. We talk about how Baltimore is 1-5, and yes, they've had a plethora of injuries, but they were 1-3 even before those injuries really bit them in the rear end the past 2 weeks. Obviously, you get Lamar Jackson back. The game is in Baltimore. Do you feel like a 6.5-point spread in favor of the Ravens is still a little bit disrespectful for a Chicago team that's won 4 in a row? And just maybe explain to some of the Ravens fans who may be watching what they should expect from Chicago this coming week as a 6.5-point underdog.
Yeah, I mean, I think 6.5 might be a little aggressive. I'll perfectly honest, I would favor the Ravens in this matchup, especially if Lamar Jackson does come back. And the injury report came out that the Bears are going to be without Tyreek Stevenson and Kyler Gordon. That's 2 of their top cornerbacks, and Jalen Johnson already was out as well. So they're going to be extremely thin at cornerback. And if you have one of the best quarterbacks in the league, if not the best quarterback in the league, coming back from injury, then that's just going to make things, even more difficult for Chicago's defense. So, I have a lot of faith in Dennis Allen as a defensive play caller. I think that there are ways he can work around it, but at a certain point, the personnel matters a lot. And if you're down every single one of your top 3 cornerbacks, that's going to be a really difficult mountain to climb. So We'll see on that front. I do think that if Lamar Jackson plays, then the Ravens should be favored. Which at this stage, he was a full participant. It looks like he probably will play. If for whatever reason he doesn't, then I'd start to, I think you'd see the lines adjust a little bit, maybe, tighten up a little bit. I don't know if the Bears would be the favorites, if that'd be a big enough swing, but you're right in what you mentioned earlier, in that the Ravens were 1-3 before all the injuries went down, and they played a tough schedule at the beginning of the season, sure, but they're still not their typical self,
Right.
So I think that this isn't the Bears have no chance at this, like I was expecting coming into this regular season, with the expectations that the Ravens had. Even as some of the guys are starting to get healthy again. I would favor the Ravens in this one just because of, the Lamar Jackson factor and some of the injuries the Bears have on defense. But I don't know. I do think 6.5 is maybe a little bit aggressive. I'd say, if you can go like 3.5 or 4, I think that's probably what I'd keep it at. I'd probably favor Baltimore in this matchup just because of, the Lamar Jackson factor and, the Ravens are on the upswing of injury luck and the Bears are on the downswing, at least at this stage.
For sure. The Bears secondary being thin when you are playing, as you mentioned, one of the best quarterbacks in the NFL. And then you even add in Zay Flowers, who I know had a rough game in week 6 against Los Angeles, but he's also one of the most creative, route running, electric wide receivers the NFL has to offer. And obviously, Jackson adds that whole extra dimension. The Ravens did announce if Jackson is not good to go, or even if he is good to go, Tyler Huntley will be the QB too. And I like that more. Huntley does fit the system a lot more. So I think that for Chicago, particularly when their defense is thin, I think the Ravens have really kept them guessing who is going to be starting at quarterback, with Lamar not practicing on Monday. So Lamar was a full participant today. It looks like he will play. I mean, look, I know you're more of a Bears guy, but like Lamar, one of the best dual threats we've ever seen. What dimension does he add to this game that really will alter things?
Yeah, I mean, naturally, I think that you're going to have to play a little bit more conservative in terms of having a QB spy, in terms of accounting for Lamar's running ability. I mean, he's, like you said, one of the best dual threat quarterbacks, in NFL history. I think that if he's not already, I think that by the time he retires, we'll be looking at him as the greatest dual threat quarterback in NFL history.
Yeah.
And when you have a quarterback who's that athletic, just naturally, I think it, kind of limits what you can do in terms of, in terms of coverage too, because, you have to account for one guy specifically keying in on the quarterback, and with how fast and agile Lamar is, there's no guarantee that that's going to work. And that's not even including what he does as a passer, which I think, in addition to probably being the best running quarterback in the NFL, he's one of the best passing quarterbacks in the NFL now as well.
Yeah.
And that makes him incredibly tough to stop. I don't anticipate he's going to run as much coming off the hamstring injury, just, to play it safe. But even then, I mean, he's still, a fantastic pocket passer. And I think that from that perspective, especially when the Bears are down at cornerback, I think that it kind of limits. You're probably not going to play a whole lot of man coverage. They're probably going to play it safe with more passive zone, just because they don't necessarily trust the personnel. That's just what my opinion is going to be for the Bears, defending Lamar Jackson, defending this Ravens passing attack. Like you mentioned, Zay Flowers too is an incredibly talented young wide receiver. It's not going to be a picnic for the Bears defense for sure. So I think that you might see a little bit less aggressiveness in coverage out of Dennis Allen than what you'd see regularly out of him. We'll see exactly how that works. I mean, this is a defense that's been getting takeaways like crazy the last 3-4 weeks. They've been doing a really good job of generating turnovers, whether it's, interceptions or fumbles. I think they're going to be a lot tougher to come by when you have a player like Lamar Jackson at quarterback. But we'll see. We'll see. I do anticipate it's going to be a different style of defense, just because you need to account for the personnel aspect of things.
I think Lamar's rushing ability is something to keep an eye on in this matchup because we'll see how much he does utilize his legs. It felt like he wasn't running as much in the first few games where like Lamar was still rolling out of the pocket, right, and extending plays and doing what Lamar does best, but it felt like he wasn't actually running as much. His design runs, those were all down. And so I think coming off of the hamstring injury, maybe it was something that was lingering earlier in the season that we didn't know about. I'm curious to see when Lamar does kind of get reacclimated on the ground and see when he really does start to get those numbers up because he's one of the most prolific runners in the league, one who led the NFL in yards per rush attempt last year. So I think that's certainly a key storyline. Real quick before we break down some of the keys to the game, I do want to talk about this Chicago offense because Baltimore's defense has certainly struggled this season at parts of the year. They did play better before the bye week against the Los Angeles Rams, holding that prolific offense to 17 points, and it could have been less if the offense gave them a little bit more. But it was a better game for sure, but it's still a defense where now you're facing a guy in Caleb Williams who has had a good season, a guy in DeAndre Swift who's done his job. The receiving core has been inconsistent. How do you expect Chicago to try to go and exploit Baltimore's defense on Sunday?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of it comes down to the passing attack, like you said, and it's been interesting to watch this year because I'd say that Ben Johnson has been, for the most part, he's been as advertised, at least as an offensive play caller, as a guy who can scheme receivers open. I think that the Bears offense makes way more sense this year than it did last year under Shane Waldron, the previous years under Luke Getsy. And that's not a high bar necessarily, but it still speaks to, I feel very confident that Ben Johnson can get guys open. And I do think Caleb Williams has been better this year. I don't think he's necessarily been great. I think that's something where this offense is still doing really good things and they're getting big plays. All that in spite of the consistency in the passing game's not quite there yet, which I think that bodes very well for them in the future, where if things look this good right now, if Caleb can take that next step, it could be potentially dangerous. So the way I look at it is, he's making good decisions. He's not necessarily making a ton of errant throws. He finds the open man pretty well. He does a much better job of avoiding sacks this year than he has in years past. So I think he deserves a lot of credit for that as well. Just having that pocket awareness and the ability to know, all right, this is when I abandon the pocket. This is when I, scramble outside, or this is when I climb the pocket, and then this is when I get the ball away. I think he's doing a lot better job at that. But there's still some of the accuracy issues that are, it's a little bit concerning to where you're guaranteed basically a good, 4 or 5 passes a game where it's like, what was he doing there? I mean, it's like he found the open man. He's making the right call. He's not making errant decisions with the football. It's just he's totally airmailing guys. And I think that it's been a complete opposite of last year, really, and where Caleb was pretty accurate in the short game, but he was bad from intermediate and deep ranges. He's been a lot better stretching the field this year, and I anticipate that we're going to see a little bit, we're going to see that continue against the Baltimore Ravens defense, where maybe they'll, it's going to have a little bit deeper of an average depth of target, at least, especially against a secondary that's been a little bit shaky, pre-injury, post-injury, whatever the case may be. Because I think that the short game isn't necessarily working incredibly well right now for Chicago. So I expect they're going to try and do that. And another thing, too, in the run game is I think a lot of this Ben Johnson offense is rooted in a lot of zone running. I mean, particularly wide zone they do a good job in, but, inside zone, outside zone, wide zone, whatever the case may be. DeAndre Swift is at his best when he gets space to work with. And I think the last couple of weeks where Swift has looked really good after a slow start to this season, they've done a really good job of finding ways to get him in space, whether it's, in the passing game or, the way that they design runs or the way that they design blocks up front to get Swift a little bit more space to work with. I think that's been working really well for him. So I expect that to continue a pretty zone heavy approach. I mean, they're going to utilize gap in some capacity, but I think zone is really their bread and butter. So those are some of the things I'd expect for the Bears offense. I'm interested in seeing how the Ravens defense does. I mean, like you've said, there's been, injuries there. They haven't been playing very well in recent weeks. It's an opportunity now with guys healing up and coming back to, potentially, bounce back and get back to some of that standard that they had last year and in years past with some of these great Ravens defenses. But I think that Chicago should be able to do a solid job. It's just going to be a matter of can they be consistent enough in the short game to overcome the value that Lamar Jackson's inevitably going to bring.
No, for sure. 100%. And I think that we're going to learn a lot about Baltimore's defense this week. I think that they're going to obviously have to hope that Caleb Williams does make mistakes, but the Ravens cannot allow the big plays that they have allowed before. And I just think that you get another game with Alohi Gilman back there with Kyle Hamilton. They were college teammates. They look good together against Los Angeles. You get Roquan Smith back in there, an inside linebacker to play next to Trenton Simpson, who's had a career season in year 3. And then the Ravens are still going to need to get to the passer. And I know that Caleb Williams was the most sacked quarterback in all of football last year. The offensive line it's been better, obviously. It hasn't been, fantastic or anything along those lines, but it's really, I think, done its job for the most part and limited the amount of sacks that Caleb Williams has taken, just 11 sacks taken thus far in the first 6 games. So I think we'll see really who does emerge as the number 1 wideout. I know that Nate Wiggins has been a stout corner for Baltimore. We'll see if Marlon Humphrey is good to go. He's been dealing with an illness this week. So I think if the Ravens can just get a little bit of pressure on Williams, you're going to maybe see some of those inaccuracy issues prominent in this matchup. And I think that could certainly, flip the game around. If the Ravens are able to start off hot and the Bears can't even use the ground game, right? Say you're down 14-0 early, the entire complexion of the game changes, particularly when you have Lamar Jackson at the quarterback position. Jacob Infante, this has been great. Also on Twitter, record viewership here on a live stream. So it's been a lot of fun to chop it up with you the past 17 minutes. Real quick before we wrap up, I know you said you give Baltimore the edge in terms of being the favorite, but do you actually see them pulling out a victory in this matchup?
I hate to be a Debbie Downer. I know if they're Bears fans listening to this, they're going to be mad at me. I'm going to go 23-20 Ravens, I think is what it's going to end up being. And we'll see if things end up changing. I selfishly hope for my case that the Bears end up winning that game, but I do have my doubts, especially if Lamar Jackson does end up playing. I think the Bears are at a point where they can play a lot of teams competitively. And I think that, even before the injuries, the Ravens showed, flaws. But I think that the state of their current cornerback room is a little bit shaky. And if you get Lamar Jackson coming back, I think he's going to know exactly how to exploit that. I think the Bears offense can be solid. It's just going to be a matter of if they can consistently get the job done and turn some of those drives where they move the ball down the field, if they can turn those more into touchdown drives as opposed to settling for field goals. So 23-20 is what I'm settling on. I hope I'm wrong. I hope the Bears win this game. I'd love to be 5-2, but either way, it should be an entertaining game to watch.
I have a score prediction myself. I got 27-20 Baltimore, so something similar, something in that ballpark. I think the game is close at the beginning, but I think Lamar Jackson is a force to be reckoned with for 4 quarters. And I think if he is on the field, even if he's not fully 100%, if he's 80% of what he can be, just even the threat of what he could be as a runner, even if he's not running, just the intention that is required when Lamar Jackson is on the field to try to have that QB spy and try to limit, the scrambles that Lamar Jackson has had more frequently this season, given his offensive line. So I think it's going to be a very interesting matchup. Can Baltimore turn the season around? That is going to be the major question. They're 1-5. Realistically, you go 9-2 the rest of the way, you pretty much guarantee a spot in the postseason. But again, you have pretty much eliminated all margin for error. At this point. So I think we're going to learn a lot about Chicago and a lot about Baltimore. We're going to learn a lot about the identity of these teams and really what they're made of in this matchup. Jacob Infante, thank you so much for joining me here on Flock Friday to preview this great matchup. And if you're watching and you're not on Jacob's feed on Twitter, please be sure to check out all of his work. Follow him on Twitter at JacobInfante24. It was great to catch up with you here today.
Of course. I appreciate you having me always. It's always a good time.
Always a lot of fun. We're going to wrap it up here alongside Jacob Infante, reporter for the Windy City Gridiron and covering the NFL and the Chicago Bears on multiple different outlets. I'm your host, Chase Coburn, saying so long from Flock Friday. Take care, everyone.